Whether we are there or not, ITSP Magazine still gets the best stories. Plenty of conferences and events spark our curiosity and allow us to start conversations with some of the world's brightest minds. In person or virtually, Sean Martin and Marco Ciappelli go on location and sit down with them at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Together, we discover what the synergy of these three elements means for the future of humanity. SquareX helps organizations detect, mitigate, and threat hunt web attacks happening against their users in real time. With its innovative browser-native security product, SquareX safeguards enterprise users from a spectrum of web-based threats, encompassing malicious files, websites, scripts, and compromised networks. Learn more at sqrx.com. At Level Blue, we simplify securing your most valuable business assets by providing broad cybersecurity experience and award-winning services. Level Blue manages the risk. You reap the reward. Learn more at levelblue.com.
There we go. Marco.
Sean.
Woof, woof. Vroom, vroom.
Vroom, vroom. Woof, woof is in the back there.
Woof, woof is in the back.
The coyote. I call her the coyote.
Vroom, vroom before we recorded, you said I had a barking face or a dog. I don't know.
Well,
I was going to go with that.
I never know.
Face only a dog can love.
Yeah. I don't know. I never know how you're going to start a podcast. So
yeah, me neither.
I don't even know how we get guests still. Like,
I know.
If they've never seen what we do, maybe they come. Otherwise, they're like, these guys are weird.
Exactly. Well, what's not weird is all the cool stuff that's going on at Black Hat. And I don't know, maybe some of it's weird in a good way. Because if we're not doing this research, things can really get strange in our world. But yeah, lots of great talks. And I spent some time picking a few that caught my attention, and this was certainly one of them. It's called Deep Backdoors and Deep Reinforcement Learning Agents. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but it sounds cool. Let's find out. And it's a panel of folks, Vas, Jamie, Sanyam, and Chris, and we're fortunate, Marco, to have Jamie and Vas on with us today. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, really pleased to be here.
Thanks very much.
Good to have you on. Good to have you on. And if you haven't figured out, those who are listening, this is part of our chats on the road to Black Hat, where we pick topics and have a good chat with some of the presenters to learn more and kind of figure out what's being talked about there. And then hopefully you go and listen to the session as well and connect with the speakers. So that's what this is all about. A quick moment from each of you to share a bit about what you're each up to at your respective universities and institutes, and then we'll go from there about learn more about the topic. So Jamie, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So I'm a lecturer here at the University of Bath. So we're down in the southwest of England, about an hour out of London or so, and I'm in the electrical engineering department. So I guess full disclosure for the Black Hat conference, I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I'm sort of almost piggybacking on Vas's expertise. But I guess, my main field of research is power electronics and electrical power conversion. But I guess relevant to the podcast and relevant to the Black Hat talk is that I've been working in the field of nuclear fusion since about 2020. And so back in, I think it must have been about 2021, Vas, we kind of met and we both got discussing. I think you were quite interested in nuclear fusion. I was very interested in cybersecurity. And yeah, we've stayed in touch ever since, or caught up quite a bit ever since. And then earlier this year, Vas said, hey, look at all of this cool stuff happening with the control of nuclear fusion reactors using these reinforcement learning agents. And yeah, got talking about that and security. And I think that's where we got this whole thing going.
I'm getting the chills, but happy that you're talking as well.
Yeah.
Vas, what are you up to?
Yeah, nice to meet you all. Thanks for coming. I am a principal research scientist at the Alan Turing Institute. I lead a team here on autonomous cyber defense, and we play both sides, both attack and defense, using autonomous agents. And as a result, we also care about the security and robustness of those agents, because now we're introducing machine learning into cybersecurity. So these models become part of the attack surface. So we started looking into their security, and this is how we discovered that reinforcement learning was actually pretty vulnerable to backdoors as we've seen them in software.
All right, so like I said, when I joined, before we start recording, my head, it's already exploding. Like Jamie, I am not a cybersecurity person. I've been piggybacking on Sean for the past 15 years on this, but I look at society and technology. And I want to start with the application that you already went there, fusion, driving healthcare, and maybe for people listening that may not know as much as you do for sure, what is actually deep reinforcement learning, and an overview of how it's already being used. Any of you?
Yeah, so reinforcement learning, and I'll get later to the deep part, is a machine learning paradigm that is a bit less common. So when we're talking about language models or models that recognize objects in pictures, this is usually either supervised or unsupervised. In simple terms, it means that there is a data set to learn from. Now, the real world usually doesn't have data sets about lots of things. There are some things we have good data sets for, but in most cases, we have systems we interact with, and there's no data set. It's just experience that you learn through. Now, reinforcement learning is doing exactly that. You get to interact with a system, whatever this is. This can be a vehicle in a simulation, a drone in a simulation, or in the real world, but usually we use simulations because it's faster and you can parallelize training. It can be games, board games, for example, can be lots of things. And you learn what's a good strategy to follow in those games, in that case, through trial and error and playing lots of what's called episodes. This is the reinforcement learning paradigm. There is no data set to learn from, but there is an environment to experiment with.
And this is pulling, if we look at something like a car, this is pulling data from sensors and hubs and controllers and buses and all that stuff, right? And the cloud, user stuff, I don't know, whatever.
Exactly. So the way it learns is without anthropomorphizing. It's very similar to what humans do. So you take an action and you observe what effect this action had to the environment. And later on, you might think a bit backwards, trying to figure out which of your actions were good for your goal and which didn't actually contribute as you might have expected. And so you adapt your strategy. And if you do this for long enough, you actually end up with something that's pretty decent.
Cool,
scary.
So, so maybe describe the cyber environment, because we have had two chats already where one was very policy oriented on measuring national cyber security strategies. So not much tech stack to evaluate there, but maybe I don't know, we'll leave that one there for a second. The other is more around, measuring how well programs work. And then I just had another conversation that's coming from B-Sides, actually, looking at metrics of incident response. And so I don't know where your environment sits and what the learning is evaluating in terms of cybersecurity. Can you kind of give us an overview of that? Because there's a lot to consider, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As a side note, because I promised earlier and then I didn't deliver, when we're talking about deep reinforcement learning, it refers to reinforcement learning based on neural networks, deep neural networks to be precise. There are other ways you can do reinforcement learning using more traditional statistical techniques, but I would say that every capable reinforcement learning model nowadays is using deep neural networks. So it's almost an unnecessary detail specifying that it's deep. In most cases, 99% of the case, it is deep. Going back to your question now, my team here at the Turing is actually focused, as I said, on autonomous cyber defense, and this means we work a lot with digital environments. This includes both systems and networks, computer networks. And the goal in those cases is, assuming you have an intrusion, this can be some scripted attack. It can be a human adversary actually trying to exploit your services and traverse your network, escalating their access. And you as a defender, you would like to offload your human operators that respond to those alerts by training an agent that does at least some of their tasks. So the agent could actually fuse alerts from various network monitoring tools that they might reveal that there is potentially something going on the network, and then go on its own and investigate a bit more. And in some cases, and depending on how much capabilities you want to give to such an agent, take on some remediation actions that try to put the adversary from your network.
All right, so I'm reading the intro for this panel. So Jamie, I mean, you do work with atomic energy. You are an expert in that. I see professor and researcher, and I also read things like what Vas just said, like it takes actually some decision, but also at superhuman speed.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of like, okay, yeah, that could go wrong. So tell me a little bit about it.
I think that's exactly it. So from my point of view, I'd sort of describe myself as like a hardware systems engineer. And I guess in the case of a nuclear fusion reactor, I'll just give a very brief background to a very complicated area of technology. But basically, nuclear fusion, it's kind of the opposite of a nuclear fission reactor that we have operating today. So for nuclear fission, you've got these uranium material that sort of fissions into two elements to produce energy. Fusion's the opposite. You'll take light elements like hydrogen or fuse together to form helium and produce a bunch of energy. So we're trying to develop these experimental reactors. And in order to do this, so this is the reaction that goes on in the center of the sun and the center of stars. But it's a very, very difficult reaction to make happen. So we have to heat up this hydrogen fuel to sort of literally over 100 million degrees before it does this. We have to recreate the conditions inside the center of a star. And when we get the fuel up to these very high temperatures, basically, if you've ever seen the surface of the sun, if you've ever seen sort of an image of that, it's not constant. It's sort of bubbling away every so often. It's flaring, there's coronal mass ejections and so on. Similarly, in the machines that we design, the plasma is unstable. It's always trying to escape. And basically how we run these reactors is we have a bunch of sensors, sort of dozens or even maybe up to 100 sensors, looking at the plasma, looking at its position, its temperature and density and so on. And then it's using the actuators, which are usually magnetic field coils and the fueling rate and the heating rate, to decide how best to contain it. So what you've got, I guess similarly to autonomous vehicles, where if you've got cameras and lidars, you've got all the sensor input that you guys were talking about, and you have to make decisions on whether to accelerate, brake, and steer. It's the same sort of thing with these plasmas. So you need to, you've got a very complex control problem. And this is what really lends itself to these AI techniques, these machine learning techniques, like Vas was saying. So rather than explicitly programming, like in case A do X or something, this isn't feasible in something like this. So we use these agents to learn and respond to control these plasmas optimally. And what's sort of been shown, at least in the past few years, and this is all quite recent, is that these things can operate obviously at superhuman speed, but also incredibly good accuracy. So they're sort of outperforming any other control systems. And then I guess where all of this work came from earlier this year was, well, hold on a second. If we're going to give our control of our, very expensive reactors that could create these incredibly hot plasmas over to an AI agent, well, what could possibly go wrong? and that's kind of it. That's kind of where this all started. And Vas is obviously, we can have backdoors in these, and what do we need to think about, and how do we mitigate them? So from my point of view, it's solving a really important problem. It looks like we're going to see more of these agents and these really important use cases. So it's going to be incredibly important to make sure that we understand these threats, I suppose. So that's what do you think, Vas? That's sort of how I view this work.
Yeah. So if it's useful, I can actually provide some more depth into what does it mean backdoors for such a model, and why is it a problem? Perhaps unsurprisingly, backdoors in machine learning, they're implemented differently, but they are exactly what you expect them to be from if you know about software backdoors. So it's hidden functionality. If you inspect this piece of code, it's not obviously flawed, but someone that knows that it's there could exploit it to get access to, if we're talking about the cryptographic function, for example, perhaps retrieve a private key. If it's software, maybe exploit an online service. Now, in machine learning, all the functionality is encoded in the neurons of that model, so the backdoor lives there, which is a headache, because at least when the backdoor is written in the source code, you can audit this, and if you look carefully enough, you can actually uncover that there is something wrong here. Whereas with machine learning models, the backdoor is encoded somewhere in the neurons that are not explainable at all. We don't even know what role every neuron plays in the agent. We just know that it works because we test it. And the problem is that it's very hard to uncover the existence of a backdoor before it gets triggered to do express the malicious functionality. So obviously, in the case of a reactor, a backdoor could lie dormant for years up until it observes a predefined malicious trigger that then makes it do something that's not good for the reactor.
Yeah. And does that trigger have to be internal, or could it be an external force? Because I'm thinking two cases. One, it analyzes the environment and says, I've reached the state, or I need to wake up and do something. Or it could be, I've produced data that's sent somewhere else, which then I receive a response that says, now it's time to do something. Is it one or the other, or both? Or something else even I'm not thinking of?
The concern is that the agent might be, it's an area no one thinks deeply about. The agent is receiving information from sensors, and not all these sources are necessarily sanitized. So it can be either like internal or external. Obviously, the target is, the problem comes when external information sources are processed by the agent and they are not reviewed previously. Having said that, for a sophisticated adversary, the trigger could be such that it's very hard to detect. It could be a specific value in some reading. It could be a lot of things.
So the work that you're doing, Vas, and Sanyam looks like he's doing similar stuff at Cardiff. But so are you both looking at how to leverage this for detection and response, as you noted? But then also, is part of that you're looking at the vulnerabilities in the backdoors, both you and Sanyam? So Cardiff and Alan Turing are both doing this, right?
Yes. So this is correct. Sanyam was a visitor here in my group at the Alan Turing Institute, and now we keep collaborating with Jamie as well. What we started looking into is sophisticated triggers that are hard to detect, because the literature before our work was mostly very obvious triggers that were easy to detect. So they didn't necessarily make a good case about how big of a threat backdoors could be, because we're essentially talking about supply chain attacks, which the security community is very familiar with, but now they come from a different angle. They come from the angle of models. our concern is obviously backdoors might make it to end products, and that's one bit I don't want to go too much into detail, but in our Black Hat talk we will reveal a solution that we have designed and open sourced.
Wow, my head is going there. But I mean, the fact is that the where I focus is the word agent, like, because agent is when actually it takes action, right? So it does it in a way that it believes like a human, right? Like I believe I'm taking the right action, but a human can screw up, and so can an agent. And how do we actually have ever full control over that? I mean, error may happen, and that's why people point finger to a car that hit a person on the bike. Big deal. There's been 3,000 probably only in LA that got hit by a car that was driven by like a person, a human, and nobody made a big fuss about it. So I think we are in that phase where, sure, we need to learn, but we also need to understand that this is the future. So what you guys are doing, it's I mean, again, it's a sci-fi movie in my head right now. So I think it's going to be great.
I think the difference is your 300 to 1 example is when it becomes 300 human to 3 million, right? Because the neurons all trigger at the same time across a fleet of vehicles or something. And I don't know. I just think when we start talking about technology, the scalability of this stuff is really good. It's the speed, perhaps, where we can't contain, and the scalability where it just goes out of control. We can't contain. And I don't know, Jamie, if you have any, I can visualize perhaps what happens if you can't contain the field there, right? But
yeah, indeed.
So something you can describe.
I guess it is something that lends itself to animations and images. But yeah, essentially you've got to boil it down. You've got this very, very hot plasma, and if you lose control of it, you lose control of its position. It will run into the closest part of the reactor around it, and it will essentially just melt and damage it. So it's something called a plasma disruption. And, this is very much not on the same scale as an fission reactor where you have a meltdown. There's no kind of risk of that. In fact, it's one of the large benefits of nuclear fusion compared to fission. But yeah, you absolutely can damage your reactor. And if you're building one of these things, these prototypes can cost sort of, the real ones cost upwards of $1 billion, pounds, euros. So you can be put out of action for months or years, or even have to decommission the machine. So, yeah, some pretty real consequences. And I guess this kind of gets to the point of, if we're going to give control over these important applications from autonomous vehicles to fusion reactors to anything else in the real world, we better really understand the consequences.
Of course. Well, I'm coming to the presentation, which will be Wednesday, August 7th at 2:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. at the South Sea AB Level 3. Of course, you don't have to remember this. We will write it in the note, and it will be, of course, and is already on the blackhat.com website. I want to thank you guys for this. I think that you'll have as many geeks that want to understand this stuff right there. Black Hat and everything
this is the
else
place for it, for sure.
Happening around the DEF CON, B-sides, and all of that. So I want to invite everybody to take part of this. I think it's important to understand, even if we're never regular people like us, understand as deep as you are, but I think it's important to make our voice heard anyway in our society, and at least understand the gist of it. So impressive. Sean will be there, and
absolutely. I encourage everybody to.
We will let them know. That's why we're going to cover and share all this information before, during, and after Black Hat. So, Jamie, Vas, thank you so much. We'll see you in Las Vegas.
Great. Thanks, guys. Yeah, can't wait.
Appreciate you doing this work, and more importantly, sharing it with folks. And I'm excited to learn about the open source stuff that you put together, so people can check that out too. So you get that at the session. Safe journey to both of you and your two counterparts or co-presenters, and we'll see you all in Vegas shortly. Thanks, everybody.
Well, then, thanks, guys.
You. See you in Vegas.
Cheers.
Coro, the leading cybersecurity platform purpose-built for small and medium-sized enterprises, protects against malware, ransomware, phishing, data leakage, network threats, insider threats, and email threats across devices, users, networks, and cloud applications. Learn more at coro.net. SquareX helps organizations detect, mitigate, and threat hunt web attacks happening against their users in real time. With its innovative browser-native security product, SquareX safeguards enterprise users from a spectrum of web-based threats, encompassing malicious files, websites, scripts, and compromised networks. Learn more at sqrx.com. At Level Blue, we simplify securing your most valuable business assets by providing broad cybersecurity experience and award-winning services. Level Blue manages the risk. You reap the reward. Learn more at levelblue.com.